Have you ever wondered how a guy who was only 5'9" had tremendous success in the NFL? Not only were the odds working against him with an average height of NFL wide receivers being 6 foot tall, his childhood was far different from your average kid. But everything that we're going to talk about in this video today will explain why Steve Smith had that dog in him.
You and Talib on the field early in the game.
I don't know, you gonna ask him because he didn't finish the game. Ice up, son, ice up.
And still to this day has that dog in him.
He could be a wide receiver, he's a tier 3. Go back into the studio, I'm done now, thank you.
So how good was Steve Smith really, and why does he remain a success today? In order to answer these questions, we need to start in Los Angeles, California, where Steve Smith was born. Steve Smith Sr. was one of the best wide receivers in the league during his time playing, but his path to the NFL was not a simple and easy one. Born May 12, 1979 in Los Angeles, California, him and his mom did the best they could to survive.
I'm from Los Angeles. I'm from the inner city. My mom was on food stamps, Section 8. Christmas was just another day.
And another day in LA for a young Steve Smith meant he had to grow up fast.
Where we lived, he was one of the younger kids. And he had to learn how to defend himself early.
But that tough upbringing for a young kid in LA created the man that we know today, because that environment actually helped bring out his determination.
That environment was tough. That environment made me who I am. That environment taught me how to be resilient, how to not expect anything from anybody. It made me look at, if I'm gonna do something, I gotta do it full speed, because if I don't, that's what I go back to.
Despite the difficult times he faced growing up, Smith found his outlet in sports. He attended University High School in Los Angeles, where he excelled in both football and track and field. Despite being a tremendous athlete and highly talented, he was not highly recruited, with his height being one of the primary concerns. So Steve Smith would turn to and enroll in Santa Monica Community College, where he would impress recruiters in his time there. But that was not the only reason he would eventually end up at the University of Utah.
And Demetrius was going there, and I went to Utah really just to follow my big brother. And he never made it. He ended up falling asleep from driving from Diego back up to here for spring break, and fell asleep at the wheel and died. Wow. A lot of my life of the prosperity that I've had has really been by accident. Right. Me and my wife are starting a foundation. It's called the Posey Foundation. Because without him, you know, I would have my wife. I wouldn't, you know, I was following him. I was a little kid following the big brother up to Utah. And we're gonna do some things, and we're gonna do it for him.
After 2 years at Santa Monica Community College, Steve Smith would transfer to the University of Utah, where he would go on to play for 2 seasons. And it is an interesting side note that Steve Smith's teammate at Santa Monica Community College was Chad Johnson, who would have eventually joined Smith at the University of Utah if his academics met the mark.
Enrolled at Santa Monica. Steve Smith is there.
Yep.
Had a great year. Following year, my grades messed up again.
In Smith's first season for the Utah Utes, he made an immediate impact, showcasing his talents as a wide receiver and a returner, earning him first team All Mount West Conference honors. He finished the season with 43 receptions for 860 yards and 8 touchdowns. And as a punt returner, he returned 29 punts for 495 yards and 3 touchdowns. The following year was just as impressive. He was a critical part of the Utah offense, finishing the season with 35 receptions, 743 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He also continued to excel as a returner, returning 43 punts for 365 yards and 1 touchdown. At 5'9", some scouts had concerns about Smith's size entering D1 football. Smith ended that talk fairly quickly in his time at Utah. He finished his career there with 1,603 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. He also averaged an insane 20.6 yards per catch, which made him a dependable deep ball threat, who also was known for his ability to make contested catches. But now it was time for Smith to prepare for the 2001 NFL draft.
The Panthers draft me. I get the call, and he said, "Hey, we're gonna draft you. Do you want to be a Carolina Panther?" Heck yeah, why not? But in my heart, I was disappointed. That was just my immaturity, and that was also just kind of the disappointment that I had in comparison, right? But I learned, getting drafted, yes, you will. However, the journey begins after you get drafted.
His rookie season would be quiet for the most part. He only had 10 receptions along with 158 receiving yards, as he still was adjusting to the NFL. His time and effort though would be mostly used as a return man, something that he was well known for in college, where he had 34 punt returns and 1 touchdown. The following year though, he would see a huge increase in his production, having a breakout performance in week 12 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That day he had 9 receptions for 132 yards, but the season as a whole was not that simple for Steve Smith. During that 2002 season, on November the 22nd, there was an altercation in the film room that would later cost him thousands of dollars.
Here's what football cost me about $856,000. What? And so what happened? We had a few run-ins earlier that year.
Okay.
So it was basically he didn't like me, I didn't like him. It was a known fact. So we're in a meeting room, and he says it was a pass that I think I caught it and dropped it, fumbled. He goes, "Run that back." Man. And so when he did that, and I'm not justifying, I'm not trying to make it a joke, but I responded in a very immature way. And also respond in the way I was grew up. If you don't like somebody, you don't really have respect for somebody. So I backhanded him because he was behind me. For me, that's how I grew up.
Right.
That was the norm.
Right.
I grew up when you had a problem, you fixed it with your fist.
Right.
So that was the standard. People say, "Oh, that's not everybody." Everybody doesn't live the same way. Everybody is not raised the same way. And so that's how I was raised.
Right.
Despite that though, he would finish the season with 54 receptions along with 872 yards and 3 touchdowns. For most receivers in the NFL, those would be solid numbers, but for Steve Smith, this was just the beginning. His breakout season would come in 2003, recording his first ever 1,000 yard season along with 7 touchdowns. His play would help the Panthers finish with a pretty good record of 11-5, and this high level of play would continue into the playoffs. In the wildcard round that year of the playoffs, he recorded 5 receptions for 135 yards in a 29-10 victory over the Dallas Cowboys. The following week, he had 6 catches, 1 touchdown with 163 receiving yards. In the NFC divisional round, he would seal the deal with a 69-yard touchdown reception in a 29-23 double overtime win against the Rams. The following week, his hot streak would come to an end though, recording only 3 receptions for 36 yards in a 14-3 win against the Eagles. But that win would propel the Panthers to the Super Bowl, where he would bounce back and record 4 catches for 80 yards. Unfortunately though, the Panthers would lose 32-29 to the New England Patriots. And just like any game, losses hurt, but a Super Bowl loss hurts on a different level. So in the first game that following year, Steve Smith would start out strong, recording 6 receptions for 60 yards in that first game. However, he would not finish it because he would unfortunately break his leg in that season opener against the Green Bay Packers. But if there was an award for greatest comeback after having a broken leg, Steve Smith just may win that award, having his best statistical season of his career, recording a career high 12 touchdowns, 103 receptions, along with 1,563 yards receiving, winning the Triple Crown, which simply means he was the player that led the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. A first-team All-Pro that season, he also won Comeback Player of the Year. During that 2005 season, the Panthers would once again end that season with a record of 11-5. leading them to another playoff run. In his first game that postseason, Steve Smith would have 10 receptions for 84 yards and 1 touchdown in a convincing 23-0 win over the New York Giants. The following week, he would have his most impressive game yet as a pro, recording 218 yards with 2 touchdowns in a 29-21 win over the Bears. But the Panthers will ultimately lose in the NFC Championship game in a 14-34 loss to the Seattle Seahawks. Smith would only have 5 receptions for 33 yards. Despite that though, this was one of the greatest comeback seasons of all time. Now, let's talk about 2006, which was another successful year for Steve Smith, despite fighting through a hamstring injury and an ingrown toe injury that season. And I don't know if you have ever seen those or had any type of injury such as a hamstring and an ingrown toe injury, but let me tell you, it's bad. He would though go on to record yet another 1,000-yard season along with 83 receptions. They would, however, though, miss the playoffs. Despite that, it was clear Steve Smith was the main man in Carolina, so the Panthers would sign the star wide receiver to a new contract in May of 2007. Smith agreed to a 3-year contract extension with the Carolina Panthers that would keep him on the team through 2012. He will go on to have a pretty good season that year, recording 87 receptions, 1,002 yards with 7 touchdowns. But the quarterback position this season for the Panthers would change quite often due to an elbow injury to starting QB Jake Delhomme, which required surgery. So with these many QB changes, the Panthers were not that good this year and missed the playoffs once again. The team would somewhat bounce back the following year, finishing the season 12-8, but before that season would kick off, Steve Smith would find himself in an altercation with teammate Ken Lucas in training camp. This resulted in him being suspended for 2 games to start that season. Despite that though, he would go on to average a career high 101 yards per game and finish that season with a total of 1,421 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, and 59 receptions. However, the next 2 years would not be exactly what Steve Smith had hoped for. He would miss the 1,000-yard mark in both seasons. In 2009, he would miss the final game due to a broken arm. He had a total of 982 yards before missing that final game, missing the 1,000-yard mark by 18 yards. In 2010, the Panthers as a whole would not see much success. They finished with a 2-14 record. Steve Smith had a total of 554 yards receiving. He did lead the team in receptions and receiving yards though, but the QB play during those 2 years wasn't that great. So with that 2-14 record, the Panthers had the #1 overall pick, and in the 2011 draft, they would select Cam Newton. The Panthers that year would go on to have a 6-10 record. Even with that being the case though, it did bring hope. Steve Smith would once again reach the 1,000-yard receiving mark. Cam Newton would go on to win Rookie of the Year, so the team offensively seemed to be headed in the right direction. The Panthers would go on to sign Steve Smith to another 3-year extension worth $18 million, and in that 2012 season, Steve Smith would have 1,174 yards receiving, 73 receptions, and 4 touchdowns. Despite his good play though, the Panthers would once again miss the playoffs. That was until 2013. Despite starting 1-3, the Panthers would finish with a strong 12-4 record. This would be the best season with Cam Newton as the quarterback up until that point before they would eventually have their Super Bowl run. But even though this wasn't one of Steve Smith's best years, he was still one of the best wideouts in the league and would still challenge anyone who he felt disrespected him. And we saw that on full display in his Monday night Week 13 matchup against Aqib Talib and the New England Patriots.
The Salters, he figures to get tested right away.
Yeah, Michael, Aqib Talib knows he cannot take too long to get the rust off tonight, not going up against 13-year veteran and 5-time Pro Bowl wide receiver Steve Smith. Smith isn't any less intense with his own teammates. After Carolina started the season 1-3, Smith apparently put the fear of God into the Panthers locker room during a players-only meeting after Week 4. When I asked Cam Newton about the meeting, he took a long pause and said, "I'm just trying to describe it to you in words that are appropriate to say." That's how fiery this meeting apparently was.
Well, Steve, what's happening in the huddle on that last drive?
Hey, we're just preparing. They looked like they were hoping to win, hoping to make a play. We knew we were going to make a play. Cam did a great job. What you're seeing right now is watching a young, great quarterback develop and becoming that. And Carolina Panthers came out with a win.
What happened on the touchdown?
Poor tackling.
What happened between you and Talib on the field early in the game?
I don't know. You gonna ask him because he didn't finish the game. Ice up, son. Ice up.
But even though they had a successful regular season, the postseason would not see that same success. In their divisional matchup, Steve Smith would have 4 receptions for 74 yards and 1 touchdown. However, they would lose to the San Francisco 49ers 23-10 in what would be his last game as a Carolina Panther. He would later be released that offseason. He would eventually sign with the Baltimore Ravens from the 2014 season up until the 2016 season. He recorded 195 catches, 2,534 yards, and 14 touchdowns over those 3 years. He would later announce his retirement in 2016. Steve Smith would finish his career as a 4-time All-Pro, ranked 8th in the NFL in receiving yards with 14,731, one of the 14 players in NFL history with 1,000 career receptions with 1,031 receptions, Comeback Player of the Year, a Triple Crown winner, and a total of 81 receiving touchdowns and 5 Pro Bowls. Steve Smith's career was filled with emotion and intensity, which he used to become a great player, the greatest wide receiver in Carolina Panthers history. He was loved by many and maybe hated by others, but he never cheated the game, and that is what all of the greatest players do. And right now he is still having a great career. Maybe not as a football player, but if you watch any video on his YouTube channel, go subscribe to him if you are not already. He does a fantastic job breaking down and analyzing the game. On top of having his own channel, he is also an analyst on NFL Network. One of the best wide receivers of all time, despite being only 5'9", even though there are some guys in the league who seem to be bigger than everyone. One guy that comes to mind is Derrick Henry, who seems to be a man amongst boys out there. And if you ever want to know more about Derrick Henry, click on this video right here if you want to know more about his journey through the NFL.